There is a silence that comes after great loss, a hollow space carved into the soul where laughter and light used to live. Some believe this space is a wound, a permanent void that can only be mourned. But some wounds are not meant to simply scar over. They are meant to be filled. They are the brutal, agonizing tilling of soil, preparing the ground for a seed that could never have taken root in the life that came before. The universe, in its cruel and beautiful wisdom, sometimes breaks a heart to make it larger, capable of holding a love it never knew it was missing. This breaking is not an end. It is a beginning, born from the ashes of a life burned to the ground, a terrifying and sacred invitation to become something more. Alara felt this silence not as an absence, but as a crushing weight. It was the weight of memory, the weight of a future stolen, and most pressingly, the physical weight of the new life nestled beneath her heart. The last precious piece of her dead mate, Liam. She stood at the edge of the pack's bonfire, the chill of the autumn night seeping into her thin shawl, a stark contrast to the roaring flames that danced and spat before her. The fire was meant for celebration, for the marking of the season's final hunt. But for her, it offered no warmth. It only illuminated the faces that turned away from her, the whispers that followed her like a second shadow. She was a ghost at their feast, a living reminder of a wolf they had buried 2 seasons ago. Her pregnancy, once a source of communal joy, was now a complication, a burden. She was the widow, the broken thing, carrying the pup of a wolf who could no longer provide for or protect them. Her belly was a round, taut drum beneath her worn dress, a constant physical testament to her isolation. She rested a hand over it, a reflexive gesture of protection. I am still here. We are still here. The thought was a flicker of defiance in the vast emptiness of her grief. Marcus, the alpha of the Crescent Moon Pack, stood on a raised stone platform, his voice booming across the clearing. He was a thick-necked, barrel-chested wolf whose authority came from brute strength, not wisdom. His gaze swept over the gathered pack, deliberately skipping past her before circling back, pinning her with a look of profound irritation. "We are strong because we are united," he declared, his words slurring slightly from the fermented berry wine. "We cull the weak. We do not carry dead weight. We look to the future, not the past." His eyes, small and hard, found hers again. The implication was as sharp and cold as a shard of ice in her gut. She was the past. She was the dead weight. A low murmur rippled through the pack. Some looked at her with pity, others with a cold agreement that mirrored their alphas. She saw it in the eyes of Elspeth, whose own mate was hale and hearty, her belly just beginning to swell with a pup who would have a father. She saw it in the averted gazes of the pack, hunters, Liam's former brothers-in-arms who now found it too difficult to meet her eye. They had mourned him, and now they were done. They wanted to move on, and she, with her swelling womb and sorrow-filled eyes, was holding them back. "Ilara," Marcus said, his voice dropping into a tone of false magnanimity that was more insulting than open scorn. He beckoned her forward with a flick of his thick fingers. A path cleared for her, the other wolves shuffling away as if her grief were a contagion. She walked toward the fire, each step an act of will. Her ankles were swollen, her back ached, but it was the weight of their judgment that threatened to buckle her knees. She kept her chin high, her hand never leaving the precious life she carried. "For you, little one, I will be strong for you." "Your mourning period is long over," Marcus stated, not as a gentle observation, but as an accusation. "Liam was a good wolf, but he is gone. The pack cannot be tethered to his memory through you." He let the words hang in the air, thick and poisonous. "You have no provider. You offer no strength to our pack. You are a drain on our resources, a shadow at our feasts." He took a deep breath, puffing out his chest. "As of tonight, you are no longer of the Crescent Moon. You are packless. You will take what little you have and be gone by sunrise. Gasps rippled through the crowd. To be made packless was a death sentence, especially for a pregnant female. The wild was unforgiving. Rogues, starvation, the cold. They would claim her within a week. It was a crueler fate than a quick death. It was an execution by abandonment. A cold dread, far deeper than the night's chill, settled into Alara's bones. She looked around at the faces she had known her entire life, searching for a single ally, a single voice to speak against this injustice. She found none. They were cowed by their alpha, their survival instincts overriding any lingering loyalty to Liam's memory, or to her. Her gaze fell on her own hands, resting on the curve of her stomach. The life within her gave a soft, fluttering kick, a tiny, insistent pulse against her palm. It was a reminder. She was not just Alara, the grieving widow. She was a mother. A fierce, primal instinct rose within her, a wave of fire that burned away the cold dread. She would not beg. She would not cry. She would not give him the satisfaction of her despair. She met Marcus's gaze, her own eyes clear and steady. "You shame his memory," she said, her voice quiet but carrying in the sudden silence. "You shame the very meaning of the word pack." Before Marcus could retort, before he could order her dragged away, a new scent cut through the familiar smells of wood smoke and roasting meat. It was the scent of old forests and storm-crowned mountains, of ozone and raw, undisputed power. It was a scent no one in the clearing had ever encountered, yet every wolf, from the strongest hunter to the smallest pup, knew it instinctively. It was the scent of a king. A ripple of movement started at the edge of the clearing and spread inward, a wave of bows and prostrations. Wolves fell to their knees, heads bowed as a figure emerged from the shadows of the ancient oaks. He was taller than any wolf she had ever seen, with shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of the sky. His hair was the color of midnight, and his eyes, when they swept over the scene, seemed to hold the cold, silver light of a distant star. He moved with a liquid grace that belied his immense size, his presence a physical force that pressed down on them all, demanding submission. This was Lycan, the Alpha King. A ruler so powerful he was spoken of in whispers and legends, said to command the very winds and whispers of the forest. No one knew why he was here, so far from his mountain throne. His gaze took in the scene with an unnerving stillness. Marcus on his stone, puffed up and arrogant, the pack on their knees, radiating fear, and her, standing alone in the center of it all, a defiant, pregnant outcast. His silver eyes met hers. For a breathless moment the world fell away. She saw no judgment in his gaze, no pity, no contempt. She saw recognition, as if he were looking past the worn dress, past the grief, and into the very core of her being. He saw the fire she had just found, the fierce maternal core of her, and he did not look away. He moved, and the world moved with him. He walked directly toward her, his heavy boots silent on the packed earth. The pack held its collective breath. Marcus's face had gone pale, his bravado shrinking under the king's silent scrutiny. Lycan stopped before her, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. He was a furnace of contained power. He looked down at her, his expression unreadable. Then his gaze dropped to her swollen belly. His eyes softened, just for an instant, a fleeting warmth in their silver depths. He then looked at Marcus, and the cold returned, magnified tenfold. "You would cast out a pregnant female?" The king's voice was not loud, but it resonated in the chest of every wolf present. It was a low, dangerous rumble, like the sound of grinding stones deep within the earth. "She is a burden, my king," Marcus stammered, his authority crumbling to dust. "She carries the pup of a dead wolf. She offers nothing." The king's gaze snapped back to Alara. He reached out, and for a heart-stopping second she thought he would strike her. Instead, his fingers, surprisingly gentle, brushed a stray strand of hair from her cheek. The touch was electric, a jolt of impossible warmth that shot through her. "She offers loyalty," the king said, his voice now a clear, ringing declaration that echoed through the silent woods. "She carries the future. That is more than you will ever comprehend." He turned his full attention back to Marcus, his eyes narrowing into silver slits. "You are a fool. You cast away a diamond because you are too blind to see past the dust." Without breaking eye contact with the terrified Alpha, Lycan spoke his next words to Alara, though they were meant for everyone. "You are no longer packless." He took her hand, his large, warm palm enveloping hers. "You are mine now. You and the child you carry. You are under my protection. Your new pack is my pack. Your new home is my citadel." He raised their joined hands. "She will be honored as is her right. Her child will be raised as a child of the royal line, an heir to my strength." The finality in his tone was absolute. He had not asked, he had decreed. A shockwave of disbelief rolled through the clearing. He had not just saved her, he had claimed her. He had elevated her from the lowest outcast to the highest possible station. Marcus stared, his jaw hanging open, his face a mask of utter humiliation. The king gave him one last look of withering contempt before turning his back on him completely, a dismissal more profound than any blow. He looked down at Alara, his silver eyes searching hers. "Come," he said softly, the word a command wrapped in a strange, unfamiliar gentleness. He led her away from the fire, away from the pack that had cast her out, and into the deep, protective shadows of the forest, toward a future she could never have imagined. The journey to the king's citadel was a blur of motion and sensation. Lycan, or Kale, as he had quietly introduced himself once they were beyond the earshot of her former pack, had shifted into his wolf form. He was a magnificent creature, a beast of legend. His fur was the color of storm clouds, thick and dark, and his size dwarfed any wolf Alara had ever seen. He was a creature of sheer, untamed power, yet his movements as he carried her were impossibly gentle. He had made a harness of leather and cloth, securing her to his back, with a practiced efficiency that suggested he had done this before. Tucked against the warmth of his massive body, shielded from the biting wind by his sheer bulk, she drifted in and out of a state of exhausted shock. The rhythmic pounding of his paws against the forest floor was a hypnotic drumbeat, a stark contrast to the frantic, terrified thumping of her own heart. She should have been terrified of him. He was a king, a near mythical figure who had just upended her entire existence with a few quiet words. He had claimed her like a possession, yet his actions spoke of something other than ownership. They spoke of protection, of reverence. The thought was so foreign, so utterly at odds with the scorn she had grown accustomed to, that her mind shied away from it. She was Alara, the broken mate, the carrier of a dead wolf's pup. Men like Kale did not look at women like her with anything but pity or disdain. And yet, he had. He had looked at her and seen something worth claiming, something worth protecting. When they arrived, the sun was just beginning to cast its first pale, golden rays over the jagged peaks of the northern mountains. The citadel was not a castle of cold stone and sharp angles, but a marvel of architecture that seemed to have grown from the mountain itself. Towers of white granite spiraled towards the sky, connected by elegant bridges that soared over deep chasms. Waterfalls cascaded down the rock faces, their mist feeding lush, green terraces filled with plants Alara had only ever read about in old scrolls. It was a place of breathtaking beauty and formidable strength, a perfect reflection of the man who ruled it. She was led not to a guest chamber or a servant's quarters, but to a sprawling suite of rooms in the heart of the citadel. The main chamber had a balcony that overlooked the entire valley, the world spread out below like a map. The furniture was carved from a deep, rich wood and upholstered in soft velvets and furs. A fire was already crackling in a large stone hearth, chasing away the last of the night's chill. It was a gilded cage, beautiful and terrifying in its opulence. She felt like a stray dog brought in from the rain, dripping mud on a priceless carpet. A young woman with kind eyes and a quiet demeanor introduced herself as Lyra and helped Alara into a warm bath scented with lavender and chamomile. She laid out a simple but exquisitely made nightgown of soft white cotton. Lyra's deference was unnerving. She treated Alara not as a refugee, but as a queen. In the days that followed, this strange, disorienting pattern continued. Kale was a distant, almost spectral presence. She would glimpse him across a courtyard, a formidable figure in quiet conversation with his guards, or see his shadow pass her door late at night. He did not summon her. He did not impose himself upon her. Yet, his influence was everywhere. Her every need was anticipated and met before she could even voice it. A royal healer, a gentle, wise old woman named Maeve, came to check on her and the baby every morning, bringing herbal teas to soothe her aches and strengthen her womb. Meals appeared in her chambers, tailored to the cravings of her pregnancy. Smoked river fish with honey, tart mountain berries with fresh cream, hearty stews that warmed her from the inside out. He was caring for her, but from a distance, as if she were a rare, fragile plant he was tending in a greenhouse. The isolation, though comfortable, began to weigh on her. She was safe. She was warm. She was fed. But she was utterly alone with her thoughts. Her grief for Liam, which had been a sharp, constant agony, now had the space to settle into a deep, aching melancholy. She would sit on the balcony for hours, one hand on her belly, the other clutching the small, worn wooden wolf Liam had carved for her on their mating day. It was the only thing she had brought with her from her old life. "What am I doing here, Liam?" she would think, her silent words carried away on the mountain wind. "This king, he saved me. He saved our pup. But why? What does he want in return?" Kings did not act out of charity. Power was a currency, and every action was a transaction. She was waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the bill for her salvation to be presented. Did he want her to be his mate? The thought sent a jolt of panic through her. Her heart belonged to Liam. It was a shattered, broken thing, but it was his. How could she even consider another? And yet, she remembered the feel of his hand on hers, the impossible warmth of his touch, the way his silver eyes had seemed to look straight into her soul. She remembered the rumble of his voice as he defended her. A part of her, a small, treacherous part she refused to acknowledge, was drawn to the strength and stillness in him. It was like a ship, battered and lost at sea, being drawn into the orbit of a safe, quiet harbor. The fear and the confusion warred within her, leaving her exhausted and on edge. She was living in a beautiful prison, tended to by a ghost king whose motives were a mystery. One evening, as she sat before her fire, she felt a sharp, sudden cramp in her lower belly. Panic seized her. She cried out, clutching herself as another wave of pain washed over her. It was too soon. The pup was not due for another 2 months. Before she could even call for help, her door burst open. Kale stood there, his face a mask of controlled alarm. He must have been right outside. He was across the room in 3 long strides, kneeling before her, his large hands hovering over her belly, not daring to touch. "What is it?" he asked, his voice a low, urgent rumble. "The pain," she gasped, tears welling in her eyes. "It's too soon." His silver eyes were locked on hers, and in them she saw a raw, undisguised fear that mirrored her own. In that moment, he was not a king. He was just a man, terrified for her and the child she carried. He looked more afraid than she felt. The realization was a strange comfort, a tiny anchor in the swirling storm of her panic. He was not a distant, unfeeling monarch. He was here, and he was afraid for her. The gilded cage, for all its comfort, had walls, and within those walls, whispers grew like creeping vines. Alara was a curiosity, the king's strange acquisition. The pack members of the Silver Mountain Citadel were disciplined and loyal, their faces betraying nothing as she passed. But she could feel their eyes on her back. She heard the silence that fell when she entered a room, the way conversations would resume a beat too late, pitched just a little too low. She was an outsider, a stray from a lesser pack, carrying the pup of another male. And she had been placed at the very heart of their world. The resentment was inevitable. It finally took form in a woman named Seraphina. She was beautiful in the way of a finely crafted weapon, all sharp angles, cold fire, and dangerous grace. Her hair was the color of spun gold, her eyes a piercing, intelligent blue. She was the daughter of the king's late Beta, raised in the citadel, and it was widely assumed, both by herself and by many others, that she would one day be Kael's Luna. Her claim was one of blood, loyalty, and long-standing proximity. Alara's was nothing, a whim of the king. Seraphina found Alara in the high gardens, a terrace filled with night-blooming moon-petal flowers, whose silvery white blossoms filled the air with a sweet, intoxicating scent. Alara had come here for a moment of peace, to feel the cool night air on her skin and watch the stars, which seemed so much closer and brighter in the high mountains. "You should not be out so late." Seraphina's voice was smooth as silk, but with an edge of steel beneath it. "The night air is not good for your condition." Alara turned, her hand instinctively going to her belly. Seraphina stood a few feet away, her arms crossed, her expression a careful blend of concern and condescension. "The healers say the fresh air is good for me," Alara replied, her voice quiet but firm. She would not be intimidated. "Of course," Seraphina said with a small, tight smile. "They must take every precaution. It would be a tragedy to lose the legacy." The word was weighted with meaning, each syllable a carefully aimed barb. "It is a great responsibility, carrying the pup of a dead wolf, especially now that the king has taken such an interest." She took a step closer, her blue eyes raking over Alara's form, lingering on the swell of her belly. "He is a man of great honor, our king. He feels a duty to the weak, the broken. It is a noble trait, but sometimes misguided. Broken." The word landed like a slap. It was what Marcus had thought. It was what they all thought. "I did not ask for his charity," Alara said, her voice trembling slightly despite her efforts to keep it steady. Seraphina's smile widened, a predator sensing a wound. "No, of course not. You are merely the fortunate vessel. He sees a child without a father, a future for his kingdom, and he acts. It is all very practical, but you must not mistake his sense of duty for genuine affection." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "A king needs a queen, not a memorial. He needs a strong mate to stand beside him, one who can give him true heirs, born of his own blood. Once your pup is born and his duty is fulfilled, you will find your position here is not as secure as you believe." The cruelty was breathtaking. Seraphina was methodically dismantling Alara's fragile sense of security, painting the king's protection as a temporary political maneuver and her own existence as a means to an end. Every fear Alara had harbored in the silence of her rooms was being given voice, twisted into a weapon against her. Before Alara could form a response, a shadow fell over them both. "That is enough, Seraphina." Kyle's voice was unnervingly calm. It was the stillness at the center of a hurricane. He had approached, without a sound, a phantom in the moonlight. His presence was so immense, it seemed to suck the very air from the garden. Seraphina started, her composure shattering for a fraction of a second. She turned to him, her face quickly reassembling into a mask of placid respect. "My king, I was just expressing my concern for Alara's well-being." "I heard your concern," Kale said, his silver eyes like chips of ice. He moved to stand beside Alara, a solid, immovable wall of protective energy. He did not look at her, but she could feel the heat from his body, the coiled tension in his muscles. His anger was a palpable thing, a low thrumming in the air. "You will not speak to her again. You will not approach her. You will not even look in her direction. Do you understand me?" Seraphina's face paled. A public rebuke from the king, especially in defense of this outsider, was a devastating blow to her pride and her standing. I only meant—" "I know what you meant." He cut her off, his voice dropping lower, colder. "You mistake my actions for political calculation. You see a chessboard where I see a life. You have forgotten the most fundamental law of the pack. We protect the vulnerable. We honor the loyal. We cherish new life." He took a step toward Seraphina, who flinched back. Alara embodies all of those things. Her loyalty to her fallen mate is a thing of honor, not a weakness. The life she carries is a sacred trust. You see her as broken. I see her as whole. More whole than you will ever be, with your heart full of ambition instead of compassion. He stopped, looming over her. "Leave. Now. And do not forget this lesson." Seraphina, stripped of her pride and her power, gave a stiff, jerky bow and fled from the garden. The silence she left behind was heavy, charged with the lingering energy of Kale's fury. He stood for a long moment, his back to Alara, his shoulders rigid as he visibly brought his anger under control. The air seemed to crackle around him. Finally, he turned to face her. His expression was no longer cold but weary, and his silver eyes were filled with a profound regret. "I am sorry," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I should have anticipated that. I should have protected you from it." Alara found her voice, though it was shaky. "You did." He shook his head, a muscle working in his jaw. "Not soon enough." He looked at her, truly looked at her, and the distance he had so carefully maintained seemed to dissolve in the moonlight. "What she said is not true. This is not about duty. This is not a political arrangement." He took a step closer, his gaze intense, searching. "I chose you, Alara. Not as a vessel, not as a burden to be managed. I chose you." The words hung between them, simple, direct, and utterly world-altering. He had not just defended her status, he had defended her. He had claimed her not out of pity, but out of choice. The implications of that choice were too vast, too terrifying for her to comprehend. But as she stood there, bathed in the light of the moon-petal flowers, with the most powerful man she had ever known looking at her as if she were the only person in the world, the walls of her gilded cage began to feel a little less like a prison and a little more like a sanctuary. The sharp pains that had gripped her that night in front of the fire had subsided after an hour of Maeve's gentle ministrations and a potent, earthy-tasting tea. The old healer had assured her they were merely the result of stress and the strain of the journey, the body's way of protesting the recent turmoil. But the fear had lingered, a cold residue in Alara's heart. The pup, her precious link to Liam, was vulnerable, and so was she. The incident in the garden with Seraphina had only amplified that feeling. The world was full of sharp edges, and she was soft, fragile. Kale's defense of her had been a shield, but she knew shields could break. A few nights later, the fear returned with a vengeance. She awoke with a gasp, her body drenched in a cold sweat. A nightmare. The same one that had haunted her since Liam's death. The ambush. The scent of rogue wolves. thick and sour with bloodlust, the terrible final snap of bone. She sat up, her heart hammering against her ribs, her breath coming in ragged sobs. She pressed her hands against her belly, seeking the solid, reassuring presence of her child. A sharp, violent cramp answered her touch, stealing her breath. Another followed, harder than the last. This was not the dull ache of stress. This was different. This was wrong. Panic, cold and absolute, washed over her. She tried to call out for Lyra, for Maeve, but her throat was tight with terror, and only a strangled cry escaped. The door to her chambers flew open with such force that it slammed against the stone wall. Cale filled the doorway, not in his usual calm, composed manner, but as a whirlwind of primal concern. He wore only a pair of dark trousers, his magnificent chest bare, revealing a tapestry of faint, silvery scars that hinted at battles she could not imagine. His hair was disheveled, and his eyes were wild. This moment right here, pure Alpha King energy. Drop a comment if you're as obsessed with Cale as we are. He had clearly been sleeping, but now he was more awake, more intensely present than anyone she had ever seen. He was at her bedside in an instant, his large frame eclipsing the candlelight. "Alara, what is it?" The words were a low growl of fear. "The pain," she choked out, doubling over as another vicious cramp seized her. "It's the pup." He didn't hesitate. He didn't call for the healer. He acted. He sat on the edge of her bed, his presence a solid anchor in her storm of pain. "Breathe," he commanded, his voice deep and steady, cutting through her panic. "Breathe with me." He took a deep, slow breath, and she found herself against all odds, matching it. He did it again and again, until her frantic gasps began to even out. Then he reached out, his hands large and warm, and placed them with infinite gentleness on her swollen belly. His touch was not merely skin on skin. A strange, vibrant warmth spread from his palms, sinking deep into her, a golden liquid light that flowed directly to the heart of her pain. It was a feeling she had never experienced, a profound sense of peace and strength pouring into her from him. The vicious cramping began to subside, replaced by a deep, soothing heat. She stared at him, her eyes wide with awe. His own eyes were closed, his brow furrowed in concentration. The air around him seemed to shimmer with a faint silvery light. She could feel his energy, his very life force, flowing into her, calming the distress in her womb, cocooning her child in a blanket of protective power. It was an alpha's gift, a power spoken of only in legends, the ability to heal, to soothe, to protect with one's own essence. It was an act of supreme intimacy, a sharing of his innermost self that went far beyond a physical touch. If this protective alpha moment has you swooning, smash that subscribe button for more intense werewolf romance. He was giving her a piece of his own strength, his own spirit, to protect her and Liam's child. Her child. The realization struck her with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't just protecting a future heir for his kingdom. He wasn't just fulfilling a duty. He was protecting her child. He was pouring his own formidable power into saving the pup of another wolf, a pup that was a living symbol of her bond with another male. The generosity of the act, the sheer unconditional nature of it, was overwhelming. Tears, hot and silent, began to stream down her face. They were not tears of pain or fear, but of a shattering, heartbreaking gratitude. The last of the pain faded away, leaving only the gentle, pulsing warmth of his hands. The baby, which had been distressingly still, gave a soft, reassuring flutter against his palm. Cale's eyes snapped open, his silver gaze locking with hers. He had felt it too. A slow, wondrous smile spread across his face, transforming his stern, kingly features into something breathtakingly handsome. It was the first time she had seen him truly smile, and it lit him up from the inside. "He is strong," Kale whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He didn't remove his hands. He kept them there, a warm, protective shield over her womb, his thumbs stroking the taut skin with a reverence that made her ache. He looked from her belly to her eyes, his own gaze raw and vulnerable. The king was gone. In his place was a man looking at her with an emotion so deep, so tender, it stole the air from her lungs. He touched my belly like he was touching something sacred, she thought, her mind reeling. He wasn't just protecting a future pack member. He was protecting my child, Liam's child. In that moment, lying in her bed, with his hands resting possessively, protectively over the life she carried, the last of her walls crumbled. The fear, the suspicion, the grief that had encased her heart like a shroud of ice. It all began to melt away under the impossible, undeniable warmth of his care. She didn't understand his motives. She didn't understand the depth of the emotion in his eyes. But she understood this. He would not hurt her. He would not hurt her child. He was their shield. He was their sanctuary. And for the first time since Liam's death, she felt a flicker not just of safety, but of hope. "I see her as whole." The words echoed in his mind, a constant refrain against the silence of his chambers. Kale stood on his own balcony, a mirror image of the one adjoined to Ilara's suite, staring out at the moon-drenched peaks. The night was cold, but he did not feel it. A different kind of fire burned within him, a low, steady flame that had been kindled the moment he laid eyes on her. He had not gone to the Crescent Moonpack's gathering by chance. His scouts had brought him whispers of their alpha's growing cruelty, of his disdain for the old ways, the sacred laws. Cal had gone to observe, to measure the man's worthiness to lead. Instead, he had found her. He had watched from the shadows as Marcus cast her out, his arrogance a foul stench in the clean night air. And Kel had seen her response. He had seen the flicker of defiance in her eyes, the way her hand rested on her belly, a silent vow of protection. He saw a spirit that refused to be broken, a fierce loyalty that transcended even death. And in her, he saw a painful, beautiful echo of his own past. He closed his eyes, and the memory, always lurking just beneath the surface, rose to meet him. Lyra. Not the quiet servant who now attended Ilara, but his Lyra, his mated wife. Her hair had been the color of autumn leaves, her laughter like the sound of wind chimes. She had been his sun, his moon, his entire sky, and she had been carrying his first child. The memory shifted, darkening into nightmare, the scent of blood, the splintered wood of their overturned carriage, the feral snarls of assassins sent by a rival king who sought his throne not through honorable challenge, but through cowardly murder. Kale had been a storm of vengeful fury that day. He had torn them apart with his bare hands, his grief a white-hot agony that fueled his strength. But he had been too late. He had held Lyra in his arms as the life faded from her, her last breath a whispered apology for leaving him. He had lost them both, his mate and his unborn pup. The loss had hollowed him out, carving a space inside him so vast and empty that he feared it would consume him. He had reigned for 5 years since that day, a king cloaked in power and silence, his heart encased in ice. He had done his duty. He had protected his people, but he had not lived. He had merely existed. Then he saw Ilara. He saw the same fierce love in her eyes that he remembered in Lyra's. He saw her protecting her child against a world that sought to cast them out, and it was like looking into a mirror of his own soul-deep desire. Protecting her, protecting that unborn life, became an imperative, a need as fundamental as breathing. It was not pity that drove him. It was recognition. He knew the precise shape of her grief, because it was the same shape as his own. He knew the depth of her love for her lost mate, and he honored it. That kind of loyalty was the rarest, most precious treasure in the world. Seraphina, with her cold ambition, could never comprehend it. She saw Alara as a weakness, a liability. Kale saw her as a testament to the enduring power of love. His hand clenched on the cold stone of the balcony railing, the fear he had felt when he'd heard her cry out in pain. It had been a physical blow, a terrifying echo of his own helplessness 5 years ago. Pouring his own energy into her, feeling the small life within her womb quiet and steady under his touch, had been an act of desperation. But it had also been something more. It had been the first time in 5 years he had felt something other than the icy grip of duty or the dull ache of loss. He had felt a connection, a fierce, possessive, protective surge that was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. The smile she had given him when the pup had kicked against his hand, a small, watery, exhausted thing, had struck him with more force than any physical blow. It was the first crack in the ice that had surrounded his heart for half a decade. He was playing a dangerous game. He was letting her in. He was allowing himself to care for this woman and her child, leaving himself vulnerable to the same kind of devastating loss that had nearly destroyed him once before. Every instinct for self-preservation screamed at him to maintain his distance, to treat this as what Seraphina believed it to be, a political arrangement, an act of kingly duty. But his heart, the broken, scarred thing he thought long dead, had other ideas. It yearned for her. It recognized her as a kindred spirit, another soul shaped by the brutal chisel of grief. He had told her he chose her. It was the truest thing he had said in years. He had not chosen a vessel or a placeholder, Luna. He had chosen the quiet strength in her eyes, the unyielding love she held for her child, the honorable way she carried the memory of her mate. He had chosen Alara, the way he chooses her over and over again, hit like if you love a king who knows what he wants. And as he stood there, watching the light in her window finally go out, he made a silent vow to the stars. He had failed to protect his first family. He would not fail this one. He would be their shield. He would be their fortress. He would sooner let the mountains crumble to dust than allow any harm to come to her or the child she carried. It was not a king's decree. It was a male's solemn, unbreakable promise. He would love them like his own, because in the broken, healing chambers of his heart, they already were. The relative peace of the citadel was a fragile thing, a thin pane of glass against the harsh realities of the world outside. Alara had allowed herself to be lulled by the rhythm of her days, the gentle checkups with Maeve, the quiet hours spent on her balcony, the brief, charged encounters with Kale that left her heart fluttering like a trapped bird. She had begun to feel safe. It was a foolish mistake. The news came like a thunderclap on a clear day. A patrol had been ambushed at the southern pass. 3 of Kale's warriors were dead. The attackers were rogues, but they were organized, well-armed, and led by a wolf whose scent was sickeningly familiar to the survivors. It was Marcus. Humiliated and stripped of his authority by Kale's public condemnation, her former alpha had not simply slunk away in shame. His pride, twisted and festering, had curdled into a venomous rage. He had been cast out by his own pack, who feared the king's wrath and had gathered a small, vicious army of other disgraced and desperate wolves. And he was coming for his revenge. Not against Kale's armies, not in an open challenge. He was coming for her. The logic was as simple as it was cruel. She was the source of his humiliation. By taking her, by destroying the king's new acquisition, he would wound Kale in the most public and personal way possible. He would prove the king was not untouchable. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced the fragile bubble of Alara's security. She was the target. Her existence put this entire citadel, this pack that had cautiously begun to accept her, in danger. A council was convened in the Great Hall, a vast, echoing chamber where a single throne of carved mountain ash sat upon a raised dais. Kale had insisted she be present. She sat in a chair beside the throne, a position of honor that made her feel like an imposter. The pack's senior warriors and advisors stood before them, their faces grim. "He is using guerrilla tactics," a grizzled warrior named Finn reported, his voice rough. "Hit and run. They know the lower mountain paths better than we do. They are avoiding open confrontation. They are trying to draw our forces thin, create an opening." "An opening to the citadel," Kale finished, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He sat on his throne, not leaning back in a position of comfort, but perched on the edge, a predator coiled to strike. His silver eyes were glacial. "He wants Alara." The words, spoken so bluntly, sent a fresh wave of fear through her. Every eye in the hall turned to her. She saw not accusation, but concern. They were not blaming her. They were worried for her. The shift in their perception was a small, startling comfort. "We must move you to the inner sanctum," Finn said, his gaze on Alara. "It is the most defensible part of the citadel. You and the healers will be safe there until we have neutralized this threat." Alara's heart pounded. To be hidden away, locked deep in the mountain while others fought and died for her, it felt like cowardice. It felt like being a burden all over again. "No," she said, the words soft but clear in the cavernous hall. All heads turned back to her, surprised. Kale looked at her, his expression unreadable, but he did not silence her. He waited. "He is using me as bait," she continued, her voice gaining strength as the idea took shape in her mind. "He wants you to divide your forces to protect me. He wants you to hide me away. That is what he expects. So we should do the opposite." Finn frowned. "My lady, that is not—" "He thinks I am weak," Alara said, standing up. Her pregnancy made the movement awkward, but she stood tall, her hand resting on her belly. She was not just protecting herself anymore. She was protecting her child's future home. "He cast me out because he thought I was a useless burden. His entire plan is based on the idea that I am a fragile thing that needs to be hidden. Let him think that. Let him get close." A murmur of disbelief went through the warriors. Kale remained silent, his silver eyes fixed on her, watching, listening. "We can set a trap," she said, her mind racing. "Use me as the lure. Let him think he has found a weakness in your defenses. Let him come for me in a place of our choosing, a place where you will be waiting." The audacity of the plan silenced the hall. They were warriors, used to direct confrontation, to battles of strength and will. This was a strategy of deception, proposed by the very person they sought to protect. Finn looked to his king, his expression a mixture of shock and reluctant admiration. "My king?" Kale did not take his eyes off Alara. A slow, dangerous smile touched his lips. It was a smile of pure predatory pride. He had seen the flicker of fire in her on the night he'd found her, and now he was watching it roar into a blaze. She was not a victim in his story. She was a queen, finding her power. "Tell me more," he said, his voice a low purr of approval. The night of the attack was cold and moonless, the sky a blanket of starless black velvet. The plan was in motion. Alara was in her chambers, the place Marcus would expect to find her, but she was not alone. The citadel's finest guards were hidden in the shadows of the surrounding corridors, silent and invisible. Kale himself was in the adjoining room, a heartbeat away, a storm waiting to be unleashed. The waiting was the hardest part. Every creak of the citadel's old stones, every gust of wind whistling through the mountain pass sent a jolt of adrenaline through her. She sat in a chair by the cold hearth, a single candle her only light, her hands wrapped around her belly. Stay calm, little one, she thought, trying to soothe the frantic fluttering in her own chest. We are the rock that breaks the wave. The attack came with a sudden, shocking violence, a muffled cry from the hallway, the clang of steel, and then silence. They had bypassed the outer patrols. They were here. Her door burst inward, splintering from its hinges. 3 large, rough-looking wolves stood there, their eyes glowing faintly in the dim light, their lips curled back in feral snarls. And behind them, Marcus. He looked different. Thinner, harder, his eyes burning with a feverish, obsessive hatred. Well, well, he sneered, his gaze sweeping over her, lingering on her belly with disgust. The king's precious porcelain doll. Not so safe now, are you? Ilara's heart hammered against her ribs, but she met his gaze without flinching. Her fear was a cold, hard knot in her stomach, but something else was rising to meet it, a white-hot, protective rage. This man would not touch her child. He would not destroy this new life she had been given. In that moment of absolute terror, her fierce maternal instinct, the one Cale had seen in her from the very beginning, took over. She was not a victim. She was a mother. A wolf protecting her cub. She subtly shifted her weight, her hand moving from her belly to the heavy wooden sewing box on the table beside her. It was a small, desperate weapon, but it was something. "You are a fool, Marcus," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "You think this is about me. This is about your own pathetic pride." His face contorted in a mask of fury. "I will take you, and I will break you, and the king will watch." He lunged for her, and the world erupted. The moment Marcus lunged, Ilara moved. It was not a calculated action, but pure, primal instinct. She grabbed the heavy sewing box, its corners sharp, and swung it with all her strength into the face of the first rogue wolf charging through the door. The crack of wood against bone was sickeningly loud, and the wolf staggered back with a howl of pain, clutching his shattered nose. It bought her a second, a precious, invaluable second. She scrambled back, putting the heavy armchair between herself and the other 2 intruders. Her body was clumsy, her movements hampered by the weight of her pregnancy, but her mind was terrifyingly clear. The fear was still there, a cold, sharp spike in her heart, but the maternal rage was a fire, burning hotter and brighter, consuming everything else. She would not let them reach her. She would die first. "Get her!" Marcus roared, his face purple with rage at the unexpected defiance. The 2 remaining rogues snarled and began to circle the chair. They were toying with her now, enjoying her fear. They thought she was trapped. They were wrong. The wall behind Ilara's chair exploded inward in a shower of stone and splintered wood. Cale came through the breach, not as a king, but as an avatar of vengeance. His eyes were pure silver fire, his face a mask of such terrifying fury that the 2 rogues froze mid-step. He was no longer the calm, contained ruler. He was the Alpha King, unleashed, a force of nature, and this was his territory. His female, his child, they had threatened. He moved like a blur of shadow and death. The first rogue barely had time to raise his weapon before Cale's hand shot out, grabbing him by the throat and lifting him from the floor. A sharp, brutal twist, and the wolf went limp, his body crashing to the ground. The second rogue, paralyzed by terror, tried to turn and flee. Kyle was on him in an instant, a dark storm of righteous violence. The fight was over in seconds. It was not a battle. It was an execution. Cale stood over the bodies, his chest heaving, the air around him crackling with the force of his rage. His silver eyes found Marcus, who stood rooted to the spot near the doorway, his face ashen with a terror that had completely eclipsed his hatred. Marcus had come to humiliate a king. He had found a god, and he had desecrated his temple. Kale took a slow, deliberate step toward him. You touched my home. Each word was a drop of ice, a promise of a pain beyond imagining. Marcus finally broke, scrambling backward, his bravado utterly shattered. I. Guards! Attack! But no one came. The sounds of fighting in the hallways had already died down, replaced by a profound, chilling silence. Marcus was alone, utterly and completely alone. Kale continued his slow, inexorable advance. You laid your filthy hands on my door. You brought your filth into her presence. You threatened my child. Ilara watched, her heart pounding, a strange mix of terror and awe washing over her. This was the power he had kept leashed, the storm he held within him, and it had all been unleashed in her defense. In defense of their child. Marcus, seeing no escape, drew a long, wicked-looking blade. "Stay back!" he shrieked, his voice cracking. Kale didn't even slow down. He walked directly into the path of the blade. At the last second, he moved with impossible speed, catching Marcus's wrist in a grip of iron. The bones in Marcus's arm shattered with a sound like cracking branches. The knife clattered to the floor. Marcus screamed, a high, thin sound of pure agony. Kale stared down at the pathetic, whimpering creature before him, his face a mask of cold contempt. "You wanted to prove I was not untouchable," Kale said, his voice dangerously soft. "You wanted to wound me." He tightened his grip, and Marcus screamed again. "You cannot wound me by taking what is mine. You can only unleash me." He dragged the broken Alpha into the center of the room, forcing him to his knees before Ilara. The warriors of the Citadel began to file into the room, their faces grim, securing the scene. They formed a silent circle, their eyes on their king. Kale ignored them all. He looked only at Ilara, his fiery gaze softening as it met hers. He was checking to see if she was unharmed, his concern for her overriding even his monumental rage. She gave a small, shaky nod, her hand resting on her belly. The child was safe. She was safe. Only then did Kale turn his attention back to Marcus. His next move shocked everyone. He did not kill the broken Alpha. He did not deliver the swift justice everyone expected. He knelt, in front of Ilara. He took her hand, the one not resting on her belly, and brought it to his lips. He ignored the blood, the dust, the chaos surrounding them. In that moment, there were only the two of them. His silver eyes, still glowing with the embers of his rage, locked with hers. "This child," he said, his voice ringing with power and conviction, a formal vow spoken before his entire pack, "is my child. He will be born of my strength and raised under my protection. He is the heir to my throne." He then looked directly at her, his voice softening, becoming intimate despite the audience. "This woman is my Luna. Her heart is my heart. Her safety is my life's purpose." He stood, pulling her gently to her feet, standing beside her as a partner, an equal. He then looked down at the whimpering Marcus, his face turning back to stone. "An insult to them," he declared, his voice booming through the hall. "A final, absolute judgment is a death sentence." He gave a sharp, almost imperceptible nod to Finn, who stepped forward and dragged Marcus away to face his fate. Kale did not watch him go. His focus was entirely on Ilara. He gently brushed a stray piece of debris from her hair, his touch infinitely tender. The contrast between the savage violence he had just unleashed and the delicate care he showed her was staggering. He had shown his pack, and the entire world, what was sacred to him. He had not just claimed her, he had elevated her. He had knelt before her, the pregnant carrier of another wolf's child, and declared her his queen. The aftermath of the attack should have been terrifying. The splintered door, the shattered wall, the lingering scent of blood and violence. It should have sent Ilara spiraling back into the depths of her fear. Instead, a strange and profound calm settled over her. It was the calm that follows a storm, when the air is clean and the world feels new. Kale's vow, his public declaration, had changed everything. It was not just a shield against the world, it was a foundation upon which she could finally begin to build a new life. But the night's violence had taken its toll. The stress, the adrenaline, the sheer terror. It was too much for her body to bear. As the last of the guards filed out of her chambers, a deep, powerful contraction seized her. It was different from the fleeting cramps she had experienced before. This was real. This was consuming. She cried out, clutching her belly as her knees buckled. Kyle caught her before she could fall, sweeping her into his arms as if she weighed nothing. His face, which had just been a mask of regal fury, was now etched with a deep, personal terror. "Maeve!" he roared, his voice echoing through the citadel. He carried her to her bed, laying her gently against the pillows. He smoothed the hair back from her forehead, his touch surprisingly gentle, his silver eyes wide with a fear that was all for her. "It's too soon," she whispered, her own panic rising to meet his. "No," he said, his voice a low, soothing rumble that vibrated through her. "He is a king's son. He will come when he is ready. And we will be ready for him." Maeve and Lyra bustled into the room, their faces calm and professional, a stark contrast to the chaos of moments before. They moved with a quiet efficiency, lighting more candles, bringing clean linens and basins of warm water. The birth was a long and arduous ordeal. The violence of the evening had thrown her body into a state of shock, and every contraction was a battle. But through it all, Kale was a rock. He never left her side. He held her hand, his strength flowing into her. He wiped her brow with a cool cloth. He whispered words of encouragement, his deep voice a constant, steady presence in the swirling vortex of pain. He was not a king overseeing the birth of an heir. He was a partner, a mate, sharing in her struggle. Hours blurred into a haze of pain and effort. There were moments when Alara felt she could not go on, that her strength would fail her. But every time she faltered, Kale was there, his silver eyes locked on hers, his will seemingly merging with her own. "You are the strongest person I have ever known," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion as he pressed a kiss to her sweat-dampened temple. "You are a queen, Alara. You can do this." His belief in her became her own. She drew on his strength, on his unwavering presence, and found a reserve of power she never knew she possessed. With a final desperate push and a cry that was torn from the very depths of her soul, the child was born. The room fell silent, the only sound the ragged gasps of Alara's breath and the thin, wailing cry of a newborn pup. Maeve cleaned the baby with practiced hands and wrapped him in a soft white blanket. "A boy, my king," she said, her voice filled with a quiet joy, "healthy and strong." She offered the small bundle to Kale. Alara watched, her heart in her throat, as the formidable Alpha King, the warrior who had just dispatched his enemies without a flicker of emotion, reached out with trembling hands to take the child. He held the baby with an awkward reverence, his large, scarred hands looking impossibly huge as they cradled the tiny form. He looked down at the small, wrinkled face, and the last of the ice around his heart finally, completely, melted. His stern features softened into an expression of pure, unadulterated wonder. All the power, all the authority, all the grief he carried fell away, leaving only a man beholding a miracle. The pup had a dusting of dark hair just like his, but the shape of his mouth, the curve of his brow, that was all Liam. A sharp, bittersweet pang went through Alara's heart. A tear escaped her eye and traced a path through the grime on her cheek. Kale looked up, his gaze finding hers. He saw the tear, and he understood. He walked to the bed and sat beside her, carefully placing the warm bundle in her arms. Then he gently wiped the tear from her cheek with his thumb. "He is perfect," Cale whispered, his voice hoarse. He wasn't just saying the words. He was looking at the child of another man, the living legacy of her dead mate. And he was seeing perfection. He had not just accepted the child. He had embraced him. He had chosen him. He had chosen them both. As Alara looked down at her son, her beautiful, perfect son, the baby let out a small gurgle and a tiny bubble of spit-up landed squarely on the king's dark, pristine tunic. Cale stared down at the milky white spot on his chest, his expression one of utter, comical shock. He looked from the spot to the baby, to Alara, and back again, completely bewildered. A sound bubbled up in Alara's chest, one she had not made in what felt like a lifetime. It was a laugh. Not a small chuckle, but a genuine, full-throated laugh of pure, unadulterated joy. The sound was like a spring rain after a long drought, washing away the last of the grief and the fear. Cale looked at her, his shock melting away into a slow, warm smile. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his eyes shining with a love so profound it took her breath away. In that moment, surrounded by the wreckage of the attack, exhausted and sore, holding her son, and looking at the king with baby spit up on his shirt, Alara knew she was home. They were a strange, broken, beautiful mess. And they were a family. The seasons turned. The harsh mountain winter, with its heavy snows and biting winds, gave way to the gentle thaw of spring. Life returned to the high peaks. Tiny, resilient flowers pushed their way through the melting snow, and the waterfalls, fed by the thaw, roared with renewed vigor. The citadel, too, was experiencing its own spring. The fear and uncertainty that had followed the attack on Alara had been replaced by a deep and abiding sense of loyalty to their new Luna and the young heir. Alara, once the timid outcast, had blossomed. Motherhood had settled upon her like a royal cloak, giving her a quiet confidence and a radiant strength that was impossible to ignore. She was no longer the ghost at the feast. She was the heart of the home, her laughter echoing in the stone halls that had been silent for too long. If you're loving Alara's incredible transformation, hit that subscribe button and join our pack for more epic werewolf stories every single week. Her grief for Liam had not vanished, but it had changed. It was no longer a crushing weight, but a gentle, bittersweet memory, a part of the tapestry of her life that she could look upon with love, not just pain. She had found a way to honor her past while embracing her future. She and Cale had named the boy Leo, a name that meant lion, for the strength he had inherited from both the father who gave him life and the one who had chosen him as his own. He was a happy, healthy baby, with his father's eyes and Cale's determined little chin. He was adored by the entire pack, a living symbol of their king's capacity for love and honor. Cale himself was a changed man. The icy distance was gone, replaced by a warmth that seemed to emanate from him, touching everyone in his kingdom. He was still a formidable king, his authority absolute, but he now ruled with a compassion and wisdom that had been tempered by love. Drop a like if you're here for Cale's amazing character development from ice-cold king to devoted father. He doted on Leo, carrying him through the citadel on his shoulders, his deep voice a gentle rumble as he explained the workings of his kingdom to the gurgling infant. But it was the moments he shared with Alara that revealed the true depth of his transformation. The quiet glances across a crowded room, the way his hand would find hers as they walked through the gardens, the soft smiles he reserved only for her. These were the signs of a man whose heart had been completely, irrevocably captured. He had never pushed her for a formal mating bond, giving her the space and time she needed to heal. His love was not a demand, but a patient, unwavering gift. The final piece of their new life fell into place during the Great Gathering, an annual event where the alphas of all the allied packs came to the Citadel to renew their oaths of fealty to the king. The Great Hall, the same one where Ilara had once stood as a frightened refugee, was now filled with the powerful and the proud. Banners bearing the crests of a dozen different packs hung from the high-raftered ceiling. A massive fire roared in the central hearth, casting a warm, golden glow over the proceedings. Ilara sat not beside the throne, but on a slightly smaller, more elegant one that had been carved for her, a perfect match to Kale's. Leah was asleep in a beautifully crafted bassinet at her side. She wore a gown of deep forest green, the color of new life, and on her head was a simple circlet of silver and moonstones, a gift from Kale. She was every inch the Luna Queen. Comment below if you're absolutely living for Queen Ilara energy right now. As she looked out over the sea of faces, she saw them. At the very back of the hall, humbled and small, were the remaining members of the Crescent Moon Pack. Their new alpha, a sober, decent wolf who had replaced the disgraced Marcus, had come to beg the king's forgiveness and pledge his loyalty. His gaze and the gazes of his pack fell upon Ilara. But there was no scorn in their eyes now, no pity. There was only awe. They were looking at the woman they had cast out, the dead weight they had deemed worthless, and seeing a queen, beloved and powerful, seated at the right hand of the Alpha King. The transformation was absolute, not just for her, but for them. They had been forced to confront the poverty of their own judgment. If this revenge glow-up has you feeling all the emotions, smash that like button and let me know in the comments what you think of Ilara's journey. Kale stood, and a respectful silence fell over the hall. He gave a speech about unity, about strength, about the importance of the old ways, of protecting the pack, honoring loyalty, and cherishing new life. And as he spoke, his silver eyes kept finding Ilara's, and everyone in the room understood that he was not just speaking of abstract principles. He was speaking of her. He was telling the story of how she had reminded him of what was truly important. When the formalities were over, and the hall was filled with the sounds of feasting and conversation, Kale came to her side. He bent down, his hand resting on the back of her throne, his presence a warm, solid shield around her and their son. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss the next chapter of epic werewolf romance on this channel. Are you happy, Ilara? He asked, his voice a low murmur meant only for her. She looked up at him, at this powerful, beautiful man who had seen her when she was invisible, who had loved her when she felt unlovable. She looked at the sleeping face of her son, safe and cherished. She looked at the life they had built together from the ashes of their shared grief. "More than I ever thought possible," she said, her voice thick with an emotion too vast for words. He smiled, that slow, breathtaking smile that was hers alone. He leaned in closer, his lips brushing her ear. If that line gave you chills, you know what to do. Hit subscribe and become part of our werewolf-loving family. My heart, he whispered, a callback to the vow he had made in the ruins of her chambers, a promise renewed. She reached up and placed her hand over his, her fingers intertwining with his. She looked at him, her love for him a clear, steady flame in her eyes, a love that did not diminish her past, but made her future infinite. "Our heart," she replied. And it was. A single heart, forged in loss, healed by courage and beating strong and true in the center of their new world. What did you think of Ilara and Kale's ending? Drop your thoughts in the comments and let me know what story you want to see next. Thank you so much for watching, and remember to like, subscribe, and join the pack for more emotional werewolf tales. Until next time, stay wild.